Henry had always loved the quiet mornings by his lake. The sun rising over the water, the mist floating above the surface, and the gentle sound of fish jumping made him feel calm. His land was not large, but it was his. He had bought it years ago with his savings, dreaming of a place where he could relax, fish, and enjoy the outdoors without interruptions. Over time, he had built a small wooden dock and kept a few boats tied neatly at the shore. The property felt like a little world of its own, a place where he could escape the noise of the city and the stress of work. One Saturday morning, Henry decided it was the perfect day to fish. The air was fresh, birds were singing, and he had his favorite fishing rod ready. He put on his hat, grabbed a small cooler with some snacks, and walked down the grassy path toward the lake. He loved this ritual. It was a time when he could think, plan, or just enjoy doing nothing at all. The lake had always been peaceful, and Henry believed that as long as he respected the land and the water, he had every right to enjoy it. Henry had noticed signs of a homeowners association nearby, but he had always thought they were for the other properties. His land was officially his own, and the lake had been included when he bought the property. The papers were clear, and the boundary lines were well marked. He had neighbors, but they were respectful and mostly kept to themselves. Life around the lake was calm, and Henry liked it that way. As he settled on his dock, baiting his hook, Henry heard the distant sound of a car approaching. It was unusual because the path to his land was narrow, and cars rarely came down there. A black SUV came into view, and he could see the people inside, waving at him. They were wearing matching shirts with a logo he didn't recognize. Henry squinted and realized they were from the HOA he had heard about but never had issues with. "Good morning," Henry called politely, trying to keep the mood friendly. The driver rolled down the window. "Sir, you need to stop what you are doing," the man said firmly. "You are on property that is under HOA regulations. Fishing here is not allowed." Henry froze for a moment. He had checked all the papers himself. This land and lake were his. He had never had any restrictions mentioned at the time of purchase. "I believe there is a mistake," Henry said calmly. "This lake and the land around it are part of my property. I bought this land years ago, and there is nothing in the deed that says fishing is not allowed." The man looked annoyed. "We have reports from neighbors saying people are using the lake. The HOA must enforce the rules. We can call the police if you don't leave immediately." Henry felt his heart rate rise. He had lived peacefully here for years, never bothering anyone. Now, suddenly, there was a threat. "Please, check the documents," he said. "I am the owner. I am not trespassing." The SUV drove off slowly, but Henry felt uneasy. The rest of the morning, he tried to fish, but his mind kept wandering. He knew the HOA had influence, and he had heard stories of how they pressured people. He didn't want trouble, but he also knew he had a right to his own land. By noon, Henry decided to take a break and have some lunch. He unpacked his sandwiches and sat on the dock, looking at the water. Something about the lake always calmed him, even when problems arose suddenly. Henry heard sirens in the distance. He frowned and stood up, scanning the area. Within minutes, the police cars arrived, lights flashing but quiet. Officers stepped out and approached him. "Sir, we received a complaint about fishing on private property," one officer said. Henry explained calmly, showing them the deed and the property map he had brought in his truck. "This is my land. I have owned it for years. I am not violating any laws," he said. The officers studied the papers, talking quietly among themselves. After a few tense minutes, one officer looked up. "It seems everything here is in order. We cannot force you to leave. You are the owner," he said. Henry let out a sigh of relief. "Thank you. I appreciate you checking," he said politely. The officers nodded and left, but Henry could feel his anger rising. The HOA had overstepped. They had called the police without confirming the facts. They had assumed ownership of land that was not theirs. It was frustrating and disrespectful. Henry knew he had to respond, but he wanted to do it smartly. After lunch, he walked around the boundary of his land. He wanted to be sure the HOA had no argument. Every corner was marked, every fence and sign was clear. The lake was entirely within his property. Henry even took photos and videos documenting everything. He knew that if the HOA tried anything again, he would have evidence to protect himself. Henry also thought about the neighbors. Some of them were friendly, others distant. He decided to talk to a few neighbors he trusted, making sure they understood the truth about the property lines. Some had seen the HOA representatives but didn't know the full situation. Henry explained everything politely, showing them the documents and maps. The neighbors nodded, impressed by how prepared he was. They promised to support him if the HOA tried to create more problems later that afternoon. Henry returned to the dock, determined to enjoy his fishing. He cast his line into the calm water, thinking about how important it was to stand up for what was right. Fishing was more than a hobby. It was part of the peace he had earned through hard work and careful planning. The lake had always been a place of calm and clarity, and he wasn't going to let anyone take that away. As the sun started to lower in the sky, Henry noticed something unusual. A small group of people, carrying clipboards and measuring tools, were approaching from the opposite side of the lake. They looked official, but Henry immediately recognized the logo on their shirts, the HOA. They were trying to measure his land, taking photos and making notes. Henry's heart sank. They were challenging him again, but this time he didn't panic. He calmly walked toward them, waving to get their attention. "Hello, I see you are here. May I ask what you are doing?" he asked politely. The leader of the group stepped forward. "We are here to make sure the HOA rules are being followed," he said. Henry shook his head. "I respect the rules where they apply, but this land and this lake are my property. You do not have permission to conduct surveys or take photos here. Please leave." The group hesitated, unsure how to respond. Henry's calm tone and confident stance showed that he was serious. He had all the papers ready and knew his rights. Slowly, they started packing their equipment and left, muttering complaints. Henry returned to the dock, feeling a mix of relief and satisfaction. He had defended his land without conflict, but he also knew this was only the beginning. The HOA would likely try other tactics, trying to intimidate or pressure him. But Henry was prepared. He had the law on his side, neighbors who supported him, and the determination to protect what was his. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the lake reflected the orange and pink sky. Henry sat quietly, fishing rod in hand, thinking about the strange events of the day. He realized that peace was something he had to protect actively. It wasn't just about enjoying the lake. It was about standing up for fairness, ownership, and respect. Henry smiled, feeling a sense of quiet triumph. He knew the next few days might be challenging, but he also knew he had the strength and clarity to face whatever came. The lake was his, the land was his, and he would not let anyone take that away. The next morning, Henry woke up early as usual. The lake glimmered with the first light of dawn, and the air smelled fresh and clean. He had planned another morning of fishing, but he also had work to do. The events of the previous day were still on his mind. The HOA had crossed a line, and Henry knew that if he wanted to keep enjoying his land in peace, he needed to be ready for whatever came next. After a quick breakfast, he grabbed his laptop and sat on the porch overlooking the lake. He began to review all the documents related to his property, the deed, the survey maps, and even the past correspondence he had kept with the county were all neatly organized. Henry wanted to be thorough. He knew that knowledge was his best defense. If the HOA tried anything again, he would be prepared. While reviewing the papers, he heard a knock at the door. It was one of his neighbors, Mr. Lewis, an older man who had lived nearby for decades. He was holding a cup of coffee and had a concerned expression on his face. "Morning, Henry," Mr. Lewis said. "I heard what happened yesterday. I just wanted to check if you're all right." Henry smiled. "I'm fine, Mr. Lewis. It was frustrating, but I managed to handle it calmly." "I appreciate you checking on me." Double quotes. Mr. Lewis nodded. "I've seen how the HOA works. They can be persistent, but they also make mistakes. I have some old maps of the area if you want to double-check your boundaries. It might help you prove your case if things get complicated." Henry's eyes lit up. "That would be perfect. Thank you." Together, they spent the next hour comparing the old maps with Henry's documents. Every corner, every line, and every piece of land was carefully examined. By the end of it, Henry was confident that there was no doubt about his ownership. The lake and the surrounding land were completely his. The HOA had no legal claim, and any attempt to interfere could backfire badly. After Mr. Lewis left, Henry decided to go down to the lake. Fishing was not just a hobby, it was a way to clear his mind. As he walked down the grassy path, he noticed footprints near the dock. They were fresh, and Henry immediately recognized them. The HOA had been back during the night, trying to check the land quietly. Henry felt a surge of anger, but forced himself to stay calm. He knew reacting aggressively would only give them a reason to escalate. Instead, he took photos of the footprints and made a note of the time. Every detail counted. He also installed a small motion-activated camera near the dock to record any activity. This way, he could gather evidence without confronting them directly. As he set up the camera, he thought about what to do next. The HOA had already tried calling the police and measuring the land without permission. They were testing boundaries, seeing how far they could go. Henry realized that patience and careful planning would be key. He couldn't let them intimidate him. By mid-morning, Henry had returned to fishing. The water was calm, and a gentle breeze cooled the warm sunlight. He cast his line and waited, focusing on the rhythm of the lake. Fishing had always taught him patience, and he needed that patience more than ever. Around noon, he noticed movement near the edge of the property. Two young men in HOA uniforms were walking along the boundary line, holding clipboards and looking at their phones. Henry quietly retrieved the camera and positioned it to capture their actions. He didn't call them out immediately. Instead, he watched from a distance, noting their behavior. The young men began measuring the distance from the lake to what they assumed was the property line. They didn't see Henry, who was carefully hidden behind a small hill. After a few minutes, they started arguing quietly, looking confused. Henry could almost smile. Their maps and assumptions clearly didn't match the reality of the land. When they left, Henry approached the spot and collected evidence. The measurements they had made were entirely irrelevant. He documented everything meticulously, making notes of the time, weather, and location. Every detail would strengthen his position if he needed to confront the HOA formally. That evening, Henry returned to the house, tired but determined. He decided to draft a letter to the HOA, politely but firmly stating his ownership of the land and lake. He outlined all the legal points, included copies of his maps and deeds, and explained that any future attempts to interfere with his property without proper legal authority would be considered harassment. Henry spent hours writing the letter, making sure every word was precise and professional. He did not want to give them an excuse to claim he was acting aggressively. By the time he finished, the sun had set, and the sky glowed in shades of orange and purple. He felt a sense of satisfaction. He had taken action without anger, using knowledge and preparation rather than confrontation. The next morning, Henry mailed the letter. As he walked back to the lake, he felt a strange sense of calm. He knew the HOA would receive it and understand that he was serious about protecting his land. But he also knew they might respond in ways he didn't expect. He needed to stay vigilant. As he fished, he thought about what could happen next. The HOA might try to pressure neighbors, hold meetings, or even threaten legal action. Henry decided to speak with more neighbors, explaining the situation clearly and politely. He wanted them to understand that the lake and land were his property, and that he was not trying to create conflict, only to protect what was rightfully his. Over the next few days, Henry went door to door, speaking with neighbors who were willing to listen. Most of them were supportive, some shocked at the HOA's behavior. A few had heard rumors that the HOA had overreached before, but seeing the facts from Henry's side made them realize how serious the situation was. By the end of the week, Henry had built a small group of neighbors who were ready to support him if needed. Meanwhile, the HOA seemed to be growing more frustrated. Henry noticed letters in his mailbox that were vague warnings, claiming violations that did not exist. He calmly collected each letter, photographing it and noting the date. Every attempt to intimidate him only added to his evidence. Henry knew that patience and careful documentation were his best weapons. One evening, As the sun sank behind the trees, Henry sat on the dock and reflected. The lake shimmered, and a cool breeze moved across the water. He thought about how quickly peace could be disrupted, even when a person was careful and responsible. But he also thought about how much he had learned about standing up for oneself, about preparation, and about the importance of remaining calm and methodical. As night fell, Henry packed up his fishing gear and went inside. He knew the next few days might bring more challenges, but he felt ready. He had the law, evidence, and community support on his side. More importantly, he had patience and clarity, which often matter more than anger or haste. That night, as he lay in bed, Henry smiled quietly to himself. The lake had taught him patience, the neighbors had shown him community, and the HOA had reminded him of the importance of being prepared. Tomorrow, he would wake up early, fish, and continue defending his land calmly and wisely. No one could take what he had earned without consequences. Henry fell asleep with a sense of determination. The lake, the dock, and the quiet mornings were his. He would protect them, and he would do it the right way. The HOA might think they could intimidate him, but Henry knew better. Patience, preparation, and persistence were stronger than threats or assumptions. The following morning, Henry woke to the sound of birds singing and the gentle rustle of leaves. The lake looked peaceful, yet Henry knew the calm was temporary. The HOA had not given up. He could feel their presence looming like a shadow, always testing, always watching. But Henry was ready. Over the past few days, he had gathered evidence, talked to neighbors, and prepared a clear record of ownership. Today, he planned to enjoy fishing while remaining alert. As Henry walked down to the dock, he noticed something unusual. There were tire tracks along the path to his land, fresh and distinct. Someone had driven down late at night, likely trying to check on the property again. Henry's patience had limits, but he reminded himself to stay calm. He carefully documented the tracks, taking photos from multiple angles. This would be useful if he needed to prove harassment or trespassing. Setting up his fishing rod, Henry glanced at the trees surrounding the lake. He saw movement in the distance. A group of HOA members had arrived, carrying cameras, clipboards, and measuring tapes. They spread out along the property line, seemingly confused about where the boundaries were. Henry remained hidden behind a small hill, observing their behavior. One of the HOA members stepped forward, speaking loudly as if addressing invisible trespassers. "We are checking for violations. This lake is part of HOA property. Everyone should comply." Henry shook his head quietly. Their assumptions were wrong, and they had no legal right to make claims on his land. But instead of confronting them directly, Henry decided to gather more evidence. He slowly walked around the edge of his property, using his phone to record everything, each step, each comment, each measurement attempt would serve as proof of their intrusion. After a while, the group began to argue among themselves. One person claimed the lake was within HOA jurisdiction, while another pointed out inconsistencies in their maps. Henry could barely hide a smile. Their confusion and lack of preparation highlighted their lack of authority. By the time the group left, Henry had collected dozens of photos and videos. He felt confident that if a legal dispute arose, he had undeniable evidence. Later that day, Henry invited a few neighbors to walk the property with him. He wanted them to see clearly that the lake and surrounding land were his. Mrs. Howard, a retired teacher, walked beside him, examining every corner. "Henry, this is very clear. There is no way the HOA can claim this," she said. Henry nodded. "Thank you for coming. I wanted you to see for yourselves. The HOA may try to spread rumors, but the truth is obvious when you look at the land." By evening, Henry returned to the dock. The sun reflected off the lake, creating a golden shimmer. Fishing felt different now. The lake was no longer just a place of comment, had become a symbol of his perseverance. He cast his line, thinking about the challenges ahead, protecting. The land required more than patience. It required strategy, community support, and careful observation. 2 days later, Henry received an email from the HOA. The subject line read, "Immediate action required, property compliance." He opened it carefully. The email claimed he was in violation of HOA rules, listing vague infractions that did not exist. Henry read it thoroughly, noting each incorrect statement. He printed a copy and placed it in his folder of evidence. Henry decided not to respond hastily. Instead, he crafted a professional reply, pointing out the errors in their claims, including references to his deed and survey maps. He attached supporting documents and reminded them that the property was legally his. He also requested that any future communications be respectful and fact-based. Sending the email gave him a sense of control. He was no longer reacting blindly. He was asserting his rights clearly and professionally. The next morning, Henry arrived at the dock early. The water was still, and the mist hovered above the surface. Fishing had always taught him patience, and today he needed that lesson more than ever. As he prepared his line, he noticed movement across the lake. Two more HOA members were walking along the edge, carrying tape measures and notebooks. Henry calmly observed. This time, he approached them from a safe distance, showing himself clearly. "Good morning," he said politely. "I see you are here again. Please remember that this land and lake are part of my property. You do not have permission to conduct surveys or measurements here." The two men looked surprised. "We are just making sure the HOA rules are followed," one of them said nervously. Henry smiled slightly. "I understand your concern, but the documents and maps clearly show that this property belongs to me. Any further attempts to enter or measure my land without permission will be considered trespassing." The men muttered something and left, clearly unsure how to respond. Henry returned to his dock, satisfied. He had asserted his position without anger, and once again, he had gathered evidence. Every encounter strengthened his ability to protect his land. Later that day, Henry decided to take proactive action. He contacted a local attorney who specialized in property law. The lawyer reviewed all the documents, maps, and photographs Henry had collected. After a careful review, the lawyer confirmed that Henry's ownership was solid and advised him on how to handle future conflicts. He even suggested that Henry could send a formal letter to the HOA warning them about harassment and potential legal consequences. Henry spent the evening drafting the formal letter. He outlined all previous incidents, included evidence, and calmly stated that any further interference would be unlawful. He sent the letter via certified mail, ensuring the HOA received it officially. Sending the letter felt like a turning point. Henry was no longer just defending himself. He was taking control of the situation. A few days later, the HOA attempted to organize a meeting at the local community center. Henry decided to attend, not to argue, but to observe and document. He arrived early, carrying his folder of evidence and a notebook inside. HOA members discussed various rules and complaints, some unrelated to Henry. When the discussion turned toward his property, Henry listened quietly. One member suggested, "We might need to challenge Henry's ownership. The lake should be under HOA control." Henry calmly raised his hand. "I would like to clarify the facts," he said. "The lake and surrounding land are legally part of my property. I have documents and maps confirming this. Any attempt to interfere without legal authority is harassment." The room went quiet. Members glanced at each other, clearly surprised by Henry's calm confidence and preparedness. He presented the evidence logically, explaining the boundaries, survey maps, and official records. By the end of his presentation, it was clear that any claim against him would be baseless. As he left the meeting, Henry felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. The HOA had tried to intimidate him, but now they understood that he was prepared and knowledgeable. More importantly, Henry had gained respect from the neighbors who attended. They saw a man standing firmly for his rights without hostility or aggression. Back at the lake, Henry reflected on the events. Fishing had always been about patience, but now it symbolized much more. It represented perseverance, preparation, and the quiet strength to protect what belonged to him. The lake, his dock, and his property were safe because he had taken careful steps to defend them. As night fell, Henry packed up his gear and walked back to his house. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, a reminder of the peace and clarity he had fought to protect. Henry knew the HOA might still test him, but he was ready. Patience, evidence, community support, and careful planning had become his strongest tools. Henry went to bed with a sense of determination and calm. He had proven that knowledge and preparation were stronger than intimidation. The lake was his. The land was his, and he had defended them wisely. Whatever challenges came next, Henry knew he had the ability to face them with confidence, strategy, and quiet strength. Henry woke early, as he always did, to the soft light of dawn spilling over his lake. The water shimmered with gentle ripples, and the trees whispered in the morning breeze. The events of the past week weighed on him, but he felt ready. The HOA had tried to intimidate him, but Henry had learned a crucial lesson: preparation, patience, and evidence were his greatest allies. Today, he planned to fish and monitor his land. But he also had another idea forming in his mind, a way to ensure that the HOA would regret overstepping its boundaries. As he walked down the grassy path to the dock, he noticed fresh footprints along the shoreline. Someone had been near the lake during the night, likely the HOA trying to test him again. Henry stopped for a moment, observing carefully. The footprints were too deep to ignore, but he didn't feel anger. He calmly took photos and traced the path. Everything would be documented. Every step they took could be used as proof that they were trespassing. Henry set up his fishing rod and sat quietly, watching the lake. The water reflected the rising sun, painting it with orange and gold. It reminded him why he had bought this property in the first place. The peace of the lake, the freedom to fish and relax it was all his, and he was determined to protect it. Around mid-morning, Henry saw movement near the far edge of his property. A small group of HOA members had arrived, carrying measuring tools and clipboards. They seemed organized, yet there was an air of uncertainty in their movements. Henry observed quietly, taking mental notes before retrieving his camera to record everything. One of the members called out, "Sir, we need to inspect the property. The HOA has regulations that must be followed." Henry stood and waved politely. "Good morning. I understand your concern, but this land and the lake belong to me. You do not have permission to enter or measure it. I have all documents confirming my ownership." The group hesitated. One of the members whispered something to the others, and they began to argue quietly. Henry noticed the confusion and realized the HOA's maps and records were inconsistent. They clearly did not know the real property lines after they left. Henry approached the area where they had been, documenting footprints, notes, and disturbances. He carefully placed signs near the boundary, reminding anyone approaching that this land was private property. He also installed another motion-activated camera, this one near the edge of the forest that bordered the property. Henry was taking no chances. Later that afternoon, Henry received a call from his attorney. The lawyer had reviewed all recent interactions with the HOA and advised that Henry could take stronger steps. "You are well within your rights," the lawyer said. "You can send a formal notice warning them that continued trespassing could lead to legal action. With all your documentation, this will make it clear that the HOA cannot touch your property." Henry decided to act immediately. He drafted a letter, polite but firm, reminding the HOA that the land and lake were legally his. He included photographs, survey maps, and copies of his previous communications. He requested that they stop any further attempts to interfere, and warned that continued trespassing could result in legal consequences. Henry mailed the letter via certified mail, ensuring they would have to acknowledge receipt. The next morning, Henry arrived at the dock to find neighbors gathering. Many had come to check on the situation and to support him. Mrs. Howard and Mr. Lewis were among them, and they had brought coffee and pastries. They wanted to witness Henry defending his land firsthand. "Henry," Mr. Lewis said, "the HOA won't know what hit them. You've done everything right. All they can do is complain, and now they have no evidence against you." Henry smiled. "I appreciate the support. It's good to know the neighbors understand the situation. Together, we can ensure that the truth is clear." As they talked, Henry noticed the HOA arriving again. This time, they were cautious, likely aware of the letter he had sent. They set up near the edge of the property, but did not approach the lake or the dock. Henry calmly approached them. "Good morning," he said. "I see you are here. Please remember that this land and lake are private property. Any further attempts to enter without permission are considered trespassing. I have already sent a notice regarding this matter. The HOA members exchanged nervous glances. One muttered, "We should be careful." Henry could see the doubt on their faces. His careful documentation, the letter, and the presence of supportive neighbors had clearly made an impression. Henry returned to the dock and began fishing, his mind alert but calm. He knew that the HOA might attempt other tactics, but he had anticipated this. The lake, the dock, and the surrounding land were his. He had the law, evidence, and community support on his side. Later that afternoon, Henry decided to take another proactive step. He invited a representative from the county to inspect the property officially. This neutral party could confirm the boundaries and provide an official record that the HOA could not dispute. Within a few hours, the county surveyor arrived. Walking the property with Henry, the surveyor examined the maps, verified the measurements, and even spoke with neighbors who confirmed the history of ownership. By the end of the day, the county surveyor provided Henry with an official report, confirming that the lake and surrounding land were fully within his property. This was the final proof he needed. If the HOA attempted any more interference, Henry could show the county report along with his previous documentation. As the sun began to set, Henry looked over the lake. The water reflected the fiery colors of the sky, calm and undisturbed. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The HOA had tried to intimidate him, but he had turned the situation around. They had underestimated his preparation, patience, and determination. That evening, Henry sent a final email to the HOA. He attached the county report, copies of his deed, and photographs of their previous trespassing attempts. He wrote clearly, stating that any further attempts to interfere with his property would be considered harassment and could result in legal action. He did not use anger or threats. He used facts, documentation, and law. Over the next few days, Henry noticed a change. The HOA was quieter. There were no more attempts to measure the land or approach the lake. Their emails became less frequent, and when they did arrive, they were polite and formal. Henry knew that his careful, calm, and strategic approach had worked. The neighbors continued to support him, visiting the lake to enjoy the mornings and witness the peace restored. Henry felt a deep sense of community. It was not just about protecting land. It was about standing up for fairness, truth, and respect. The lake had become a symbol not only of peace, but of resilience. One morning, while fishing, Henry reflected on the events. He realized that challenges like these tested more than just patience. They tested wisdom, planning, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. The HOA had been confident at first, thinking they could intimidate him. But Henry's preparation, evidence, and clear communication had shown them they were wrong. Henry smiled quietly as he cast his line into the lake. The ripples spread across the water, reflecting the sky and trees. Everything here was his piece, land, and the lake itself. He had defended it not with anger, but with knowledge, patience, and the support of those who understood the truth. By evening, Henry packed his fishing gear and walked back to his house. The lake glimmered under the fading sunlight, a reminder of the victories of the past week. Henry felt a quiet pride. The HOA had underestimated him, but he had turned every challenge into an opportunity to prove the strength of preparation and calm determination. Henry went to bed that night with a sense of accomplishment and peace. The lake was safe, the land was secure, and the HOA had learned that Henry was not a person to be underestimated. He had shown that knowledge, patience, and strategy could triumph over intimidation and false assumptions. The quiet mornings, the fishing, and the calm of the lake were his to enjoy, and he intended to protect them always. The next morning, Henry woke with the calm of victory. The lake glimmered under the first rays of the sun, and the air smelled fresh and clean. Over the past few weeks, he had faced challenges he never expected when he bought his land. The HOA had tried to intimidate him, to interfere with his peaceful mornings, and to claim what was rightfully his. But Henry had met every challenge with patience, preparation, and clear evidence. Today, he planned to enjoy his fishing and finally feel the relief of a job well done. As Henry walked down the grassy path to the dock, he noticed the familiar signs of peace. There were no fresh footprints, no new tire tracks, and no sign of the HOA's presence. The lake was quiet, reflecting the golden light of the sun. Henry smiled. It was a feeling of calm he had not experienced in weeks. He set up his fishing rod and cast his line into the water, letting the gentle rhythm of the lake ease his mind. While fishing, Henry thought about the journey that had brought him here. At first, he had only wanted a quiet place to relax. The idea of ownership was simple: a little land, a small lake, a dock to sit on. He had never expected to face conflict, to be challenged by an organization claiming authority where none existed. But the experience had taught him much about the importance of knowledge, preparation, and standing up calmly for what was right. By late morning, Henry received a call from his attorney. "Henry, I have good news," the lawyer said. "The HOA has contacted my office. They want to settle the matter formally. They acknowledge your ownership, and they are withdrawing any claims or complaints. With all your documentation and the county report, there is nothing they can legally challenge." Henry felt a rush of relief. He had expected this outcome, but hearing it confirmed was satisfying. "Thank you for your guidance," he said. "I couldn't have handled this without your help." The attorney reminded him to keep all correspondence and records, noting that they might be important if the HOA attempted any future intimidation. Henry agreed. He had learned the value of careful documentation and proof, and he intended to maintain it. After the call, Henry walked to the edge of the lake. The water sparkled in the sunlight, and a soft breeze ruffled the trees. For the first time in weeks, he felt completely at ease. Fishing, once a simple pastime, had become a symbol of his perseverance and determination. He realized that the lake was more than a peaceful retreat. It was a testament to standing firmly for what was right. Later that afternoon, a few neighbors stopped by. They had followed the story of Henry's conflict with the HOA and wanted to see the lake and property for themselves. Mrs. Howard and Mr. Lewis were among them, bringing lemonade and snacks. They walked the property with Henry, examining the boundary lines, the dock, and the water. "Henry, it's clear now why you were so confident," Mr. Lewis said. "This land is completely yours. The HOA cannot argue with what is evident." Henry smiled. "Thank you for supporting me. It made a difference knowing that neighbors understand the truth and are willing to stand by it. The HOA may have tried to create conflict, but community and knowledge are stronger than intimidation." The neighbors spent the afternoon by the lake, sharing stories and enjoying the calm water. Henry felt a deep sense of satisfaction. His peaceful mornings were restored, and the community around him had grown stronger through the experience. The lake, the dock, and the land were safe. They were not just property, they were a symbol of fairness, patience, and resilience. That evening, Henry reviewed his records one last time. Every photograph, document, letter, and email was neatly organized. He added the final correspondence from the HOA acknowledging their withdrawal of claims. He stored the documents securely, knowing that he had protected himself and his land with careful planning and strategy. As night fell, Henry walked to the dock one final time before bed. The moonlight reflected off the water, creating a silver path that stretched across the lake. He sat quietly, listening to the soft sounds of nature. It was a feeling of victory without anger, a quiet triumph earned through preparation and calm determination. Henry thought about the lessons he had learned. Knowledge was power, preparation was strength, patience was essential, and standing up for what was right, even when others tried to intimidate, was the only way to protect what truly belonged to him. The HOA had challenged him, but in the end, they had been outmatched by facts, evidence, and calm resolve. The next morning, Henry decided to take a symbolic step. He placed a small plaque near the dock, marking the boundaries of his property and noting that the lake and land were privately owned. It was a simple gesture, but it served as a reminder that he had defended his rights successfully. He also invited the neighbors to see it, sharing the story of how he had faced the HOA and won through careful action. The neighbors admired the plaque and congratulated Henry. "You handled this with wisdom," Mrs. Howard said. "Most people would have reacted with anger, but you stayed calm and collected." Henry nodded. I realized early on that reacting with anger would not help. Using facts, evidence, and patience was the only way to protect the lake and land. And having the support of the community made all the difference. Over the next few weeks, life returned to its normal rhythm. Henry fished in the mornings, maintained the dock, and walked along the lake. The HOA did not attempt any further interference. Their silence was a sign that Henry had won not through confrontation, but through careful preparation and calm authority. Henry also began sharing his experience with other landowners in the area. He offered advice on how to protect property rights, emphasizing the importance of documentation, legal knowledge, and community support. Many people thanked him, noting that his story was inspiring and educational. Henry felt proud not just for protecting his own land, but for helping others understand how to stand up for what was right. One afternoon, as Henry sat on the dock watching the sunset, he reflected on the journey. What had started as a peaceful desire to fish on his lake had turned into a test of patience, preparation, and courage. He had faced intimidation, threats, and false claims, but he had emerged victorious. The lake had remained a sanctuary, the dock a place of calm, and the land firmly in his ownership. Henry smiled quietly to himself. He realized that peace was not something given. It was something earned and protected through knowledge, patience, and careful action. He had defended his property and his right to enjoy it. The HOA had tried to challenge him, but in the end, they had learned an important lesson. Henry's land and lake were his, and no amount of intimidation could change that. As night fell, Henry packed up his fishing gear and returned to the house. The stars reflected in the water, mirroring the triumph he felt inside. The lake, the dock, and the land were safe. The quiet mornings, the gentle breeze, and the sparkling water were his to enjoy, forever protected by his own wisdom and perseverance. Henry went to bed that night with a sense of accomplishment and calm. He had defended his land without anger, without unnecessary conflict, and with the support of the community and the law. The HOA had tested him, but he had shown that careful planning, knowledge, and patience were far stronger than intimidation. The next morning, as the sun rose over the lake, Henry walked to the dock with his fishing rod. The water sparkled, the air was fresh, and the land was peaceful. He cast his line and watched the ripples spread across the lake. It was more than fishing, it was freedom, protection, and victory. Henry knew he had earned it. The HOA had tried to mess with him, but they had failed. The lake and land were his, and he would always protect them with wisdom, patience, and calm determination. The lake was calm, the dock was sturdy, and Henry's property was secure. For the first time in weeks, he could simply enjoy the peace he had fought to defend. The HOA's attempts were behind him, the neighbors were supportive, and the evidence of his success was undeniable. Henry had not just defended his land, he had proven the power of preparation, calm, and persistence. Sitting on the dock, casting his line into the shimmering water, Henry felt the satisfaction of someone who had faced challenges, stood firm, and emerged victorious. The lake reflected the sky, the trees, and Henry's determined spirit. The land was his, the lake was his, and the peace he had earned would remain for as long as he protected it wisely. Henry smiled, watching the gentle ripples across the water. He knew that no one could take this from him. The HOA had learned their lesson. The lake, the dock, and the land were safe, and Henry, calm and prepared, could finally enjoy the quiet mornings he had dreamed of for so long.